Down through history, technology has been a vehicle through which man can experience divine inspiration. The ancient Greeks, our precursors in science, developed an automaton, the embryo of the modern robot. As far back as 250 BC, one of the first automatons, a water clock, was invented by the Greek physicist Statibius of Alexandria. It was used in the courts to measure the time a defendant was allowed to speak. Heron was another Greek inventor who lived from the year 10 to the year 75. In his book, Pneumatica, he describes more than 100 objects which seem to us to be mere toys for children. One of them, the Aeolipile, however, had much in common with the jet engine. Heron also invented a system for opening the doors to the inner sanctum of the temple with the help of the energy produced by the sacrificial fire burning on the altar. Heron's playful machines marked the beginning of the two ways in which mankind was to view robots, as our helpers and our competitors. Many of the views about the limits of science and what man could accomplish were overturned during the Renaissance. The importance of Leonardo da Vinci's contribution to the technological development of the modern world certainly equals that of his art. His fascination with the workings of the cogwheel, the lever, and the screw led him to draw diagrams for machines and vehicles that even today still fire the imagination. And this was at a time when the European conception of the world was changing. In 1543, the year of his death, Nicolaus Copernicus' De Revolutionibus was published. It stated that the sun, not the earth, was the center of the universe, as was believed earlier on. The thought that man himself could create life has always been tempting, yet blasphemous. There is a legend concerning the Jewish ghetto in 16th century Prague, which tells that the head rabbi, a man named Lowe, in order to protect his flock from persecution by the Christian majority, built a robot-like creature of clay and named it Golem.
It is possible to say that it was the imitation of the creation of the man. Like God created man, Kabbalists or Jewish mystics wanted to create some imitation. Also, Golem is imitation of the creation of man. And this imitation was made through the names of God, through the holy names of God. Also, it belonged to the sphere of white magic, it is possible to say.
Every day, Rabbi Lowe would program Golem with new tasks, but one day he forgot to give Golem his orders.
And Golem was raged, and it was very terrible, and he liquidated all streets, all houses. And for this reason, Rabbi Lev, it was necessary for him to liquidate Golem.
Just like Rabbi Lowe, the French philosopher and mathematician René Descartes very definitely thought that man one day would construct what he called soulless machines, which resembled living creatures. In 1637, Descartes presented his Cartesian coordinate system, which we use today to describe certain robot movements. the idea came to him one morning when he was awakened by a buzzing fly. He reasoned that the fly's position in space could be calculated by defining its distance from three walls connected by a common corner. In the middle of the 18th century, programmed machines began to be used for entertainment purposes. A Frenchman, Jacques de Vaucanson, constructed a spectacular mechanical copper duck. The duck was destroyed in a fire, but a replica of the duck is preserved in the Musée des Automates in Vaucanson's hometown of Grenoble.
Un automate traditionnel, mécanique. Nous allons découvrir son fonctionnement. Voilà, il a environ 14 mouvements qui sont générés par des cames en partie inférieure et d'autres mouvements indirects qui sont générés par le canard lui-même à l'intérieur de son corps. Donc là, on l'a vu manger. Peut-être. Donc il est composé de 965 pièces qui lui permettent d'ouvrir les ailes, de déployer sa queue, de la faire battre de droite à gauche, de battre son cœur, de bouger son poitrail, d'incliner son cou, d'ouvrir le bec, tourner également le cou. Avec une action tout à fait particulière qu'on va découvrir. Voilà.
Donc il a inventé ce canard et puis après c'est parti en spectacle d'exhibition et c'est parti un peu dans toutes les régions d'Europe et on payait pour voir le canard. Donc les gens faisaient vraiment, il y avait beaucoup de monde pour voir ce canard parce que c'était au XVIIIe siècle, c'était quelque chose d'incroyable pour faire. Quelqu'un qui reproduit les mouvements de la nature, ça devient vraiment fantastique dans la création.
Two Swiss clockmakers, Pierre and Henri-Louis Jacquet-Dreux, followed in Vaucanson's footsteps. Towards the end of the 18th century, they developed three automatons that astounded the world. Here one can actually see the beginnings of the wave of the future, the computer.
The first one is the writer, and it is really the more complicated one, because he can write, but you can program it. That's why we considered this one as the most complicated one. The second one was the drawer, and the drawer was completely elaborate and created by Henri-Louis Jacquet-Dreux, who is the son of Pierre Jacquet-Dreux. He was rather young, about 20 years when he did it, which is quite young. And this drawer is for us the most not technically efficient, but the more nice to see, because it's really a human. And the third one, which is a woman, is the musician, and she plays organ. And she's really playing, she's not a music box. Illusion of life, human life, was in the time. They knew Vaucanson, of course, they knew Friedrich von Knell, they knew other automatists, and of course making life illusion was the most complicated aim to do.
Interest in technology was great in Europe during this time. There was no limit to man's ability, and science was bound to benefit the masses. Out of a view where all men had their given place, there began to grow a new mechanistic picture of the world. The guiding light was physicist Sir Isaac Newton, who saw the world as a huge machine with parts that were replaceable. A Swede, Christopher Polhem, was one of the pioneers of industrialism. He designed machines that, with the help of water power, were able to cut the cogs in the wheels used in clocks. In just 8 days, his machine could produce as many cogwheels as an artisan could produce by hand in a whole year.
Hantverkarna tyckte att det här var nog inte riktigt rätt. Det var nästan ogudaktigt att tillverka så mycket. Det var ett slöseri på något sätt. Och dessutom så var det ju svårt att sköta de där maskinerna när inte han var med, visade det sig. Så att när han åkte bort så, och maskinen stannade, de lagade inte, utan då gick de tillbaka till sitt gamla hantverk, att tillverka ett kugghjul i taget.
The steam engine moved into the factories, and automation began taking over more and more heavy jobs. But despite all the advantages, in 1811, a movement began which protested against the automation of the English textile industry.
They had a mythical King Lud, and obviously that's a person, therefore, that couldn't be arrested by the police, couldn't be found anywhere. But it was their symbol under which they gathered, and they went and burned and stoned and destroyed machinery. Eventually, of course, the English establishment, the politicians and the industrialists couldn't tolerate it, and so they sent troops, more troops than ever before or since. Soldiers went into the middle of England, and they hunted down these factory burners, these Luddites, and eventually they transported many of them to Australia, and they hanged several dozen of them, and the movement ended.
Luddism has since then become synonymous with resistance to technological advancement.
It's not, they were not against technology. They said in one of their letters, we are opposed to machinery hurtful. Not all machinery, but this kind of machinery that was hurtful, that was destroying their cottages, that was destroying their lives, and changing everything.
A few years after the Luddite uprising, Mary Shelley wrote one of the world's first science fiction novels.
Dr. Frankenstein, who has such faith in technology that it can do anything, even including making people. I mean, that's extraordinary. That is not given to, maybe given to God to do, but it's normally given to sperms and eggs to do, and not to be done in a laboratory. Mary Shelley was, in fact, a sympathizer of the Luddites, and she and her husband and Lord Byron and the Romantics in general opposed the kind of technology that was making the air black with soot and was turning the rivers into garbage heaps.
Despite skeptical voices from literary circles, technological progress continued all through the 19th century. One example of this was Herman Hollerith's punch card, which was used for the first time in the census of 1886. Later, the punch card became one of the cornerstones of IBM and a prerequisite for robotization. Developments in industry radically changed the role of the worker. Mass production in the modern sense of the word was first used by Henry Ford in the manufacture of automobiles. In 1913, he began producing his Model T Ford on a production line. Each worker had only one or two tasks to perform. But due to the monotony of the job, most workers left after a short time. Now people were divided into two camps, those who wanted to automate more in order to increase prosperity, and those who believed that this development turned men into machines. One of the most virulent critics of the time was the Czech playwright Karel Čapek, who in 1920, in his play RUR, Rossum's Universal Robots, coined the word robot.
Takže původní zážitek Karla Čapka, který ho inspiroval, byl, jak on sám uvádí, v tramvaji, kde byli tak nacpaní lidé, že mu připomínali stroje. A pak hledal nějak označení pro to, jak by ty umělé lidi nazval. Čapek se rozhodl, že napíše tuhletu hru, kde bude průmyslová výroba robotů, ale později sám zdůrazňoval v několika takových dodatečných explikacích, že neměl na mysli nějak ty roboty stavět proti člověku jako nějaké mechanismy, nýbrž, že mu šlo o biologické stroje, které vznikly chemickou cestou, jakási umělá živá hmota.
The scene is set in Rossum's robot factory, where robots build robots. A young woman comes to the factory to free the robots and give them souls. In the end, she succeeds, but with dire consequences. The robots revolt and kill their human master. During the Second World War, the rate of technological development increased drastically. It was a matter of survival as a nation, and many new solutions were found while working under extreme stress. Finally, the Allies won the technological war, but the price they paid was high. During the war, the forerunners of the computers of today were designed. Their purpose was to calculate the flight paths of missiles, and after the war, they were used in the creation of the hydrogen bomb. The computers could do 5,000 additions and over 300 multiplications a second, at the time an enormous speed. It was at that time that people first began talking about artificial intelligence. Researchers put a lot of effort into reducing the size of computers, and the transistor developed by Bell Laboratories in 1948 was a real breakthrough. Transistors eventually were used together with integrated circuits in the smaller, more powerful computers, which were to become the brains of industrial robots. At the same time, when commercial television made its breakthrough in the 1950s and viewers were able to follow the exciting adventures of Flash Gordon, the Russians placed their first space capsule, Sputnik, in an orbit around the Earth. One of those who was caught up in the wave of technological optimism was science fiction writer Isaac Asimov.
You know, he was intrigued with what could human beings do. They could do great things. They could do wonderful things, and they could create robots that would be wonderful. That could and because it would be human beings who created the programming, why couldn't we create robots that would help human beings and help us reach our full potential?
In his novels, robots follow 3 laws that he created. A robot may not harm a human being or refuse to help an injured human being. A robot must always obey a human being as long as this is not in conflict with the first law. A robot must protect itself as long as this is not in conflict with laws 1 and 2. George Devol was one of those who was inspired by Asimov's stories. In 1954, he applied for a patent on an amazing machine despite the fact that he hadn't a clue on what it could be used for. 2 years later, at a cocktail party, Devol met an ambitious businessman, Joseph Engelberger.
Well, I was in an aerospace company and doing nuclear controls and had a lot of high-tech from a physics background, and got to a cocktail party and I met this chap named George Devol, and he got talking about what he wanted to do, and he said, well, he's got a patent called Programmed Article Transfer. And he listened to him a little, and I said, gee, that sounds like a robot.
The idea of creating an industrial robot was just as good the day after the party, and so together they formed a company, Unimation, the world's first robot company.
It really took us, I think we didn't make a profit until after 12 years of building the machines.
Now, several other robot manufacturers jumped into the arena. In 1967, General Electric unveiled the world's first walking robot. It weighed 1,300 kilograms and was very difficult to control, and no one could find a suitable use for it. By 1969, technological progress had advanced so far that Neil Armstrong was able to take his first steps on the moon, while millions of TV viewers watched. Despite the fact that the computing power in the Apollo 11 was less than that found in an automobile today, our picture of the world was changed forever. Many feared the consequences of our technological advances. Trade unions in the Western world once again raised their voices in protest against industrial automation, which they said would cause unemployment. Instead of a liberator, the robot, in many cases, was seen as a rival.
Wherever this new machinery comes in and makes life difficult for the workers, it is resisted, although we don't read about it very much because the losers don't write histories.
Asimov had an optimistic picture of the future of robots. He was convinced that man would finally tame the technological tiger. In his book, I, Robot, he writes, "Robots are being developed faster and faster. Soon they will be so intelligent that they will be running the business, and hopefully they will become our helpers, our allies, and our comrades." We are entering the robot age, the era of thinking machines.